The air in the room felt heavy as Captain Dorian Kane stood motionless, eyes fixed on the holographic map of Zareth 7. Its surface, a swirling chaos of acidic storms and jagged terrain, seemed almost alive, hostile to any form of human existence. The faint hum of the Starship Resolute's engines was a constant reminder of how close humanity hovered to annihilation. Kane's jaw tightened. This mission wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. The Kretak know we're here, the commander's voice broke through the silence, sharp and deliberate. This drone contains everything we need to dismantle their planetary defenses. Without it, the fleet won't survive. You are to infiltrate, retrieve the data, and extract. Failure is not an option. Kane nodded, the cold weight of responsibility settling over him like a familiar shroud. His gaze lingered on the glowing blue projection, zooming into a crash site surrounded by jagged cliffs and bioluminescent flora. Every step of the mission was etched into his mind, but no map could prepare him for what awaited. He didn't need a reminder, the stakes were painfully clear. Lives depended on him. As the briefing concluded, Kane turned his attention to the suit waiting in the corner of the room. Matte black and sleek, it was humanity's most advanced piece of technology armor against a galaxy that had turned hostile. Each panel of the suit gleamed faintly under the dim lights, whispering promises of protection against the unimaginable. But Kane knew better. The suit was only as strong as the one wearing it, and hesitation would make it nothing more than a coffin. He approached the armor, fingers grazing its surface as it came to life with a low hum. Panels slid open, revealing the intricate mechanisms within. The Ari's voice spoke, calm and detached, environmental shielding at full capacity. Systems nominal. Without hesitation, Kane stepped into it. The suit's protective shell closed around him, molding itself to his form. A lifeline, yes, but also a prison for the ghosts he carried with him. The hallway leading to the drop pod deck was a stark contrast to the chaos ahead. Cold steel walls stretched into the distance, lined with faint emergency lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. Kane's boots echoed with each step, his mind already shifting into focus. There was no room for fear, no space for doubt. Not today. Stepping into the drop pod, he was greeted by the metallic tang of recycled air and the soft glow of the control panel. The door sealed shut behind him, plunging him into an isolation that was both suffocating and liberating. Outside the viewport, the void of space stretched endlessly, broken only by the looming silhouette of Zareth 7. Its storm-laden atmosphere churned like a living entity, daring him to come closer. The pod systems activated, jolting slightly as it detached from the Resolute. A deep, mechanical voice cut through the stillness. Descent initiated. Kane clenched his fists, his breathing steady. This wasn't his first mission into chaos, but it felt different. Failure wasn't just a possibility, it was the end. As the pod plummeted through the darkness, turbulence shook the walls. Kane's heartbeat remained calm, his mind razor-sharp. He stared into the void, making one final promise to himself: no hesitation. No failure. Not this time. The pod slammed into the surface of Zareth 7 with bone-rattling force. The hatch exploded open, and Kane was already moving, the weight of his suit giving him stability as he hit the alien ground. The air was thick with acidic fumes, and the sky above roiled with dark clouds, torn by lightning. Kane's HUD flickered, scanning the surroundings. The terrain was more hostile than he'd imagined, sharp, jagged rocks and glowing flora that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The Ari's voice cut in, environment hostile. Proceed with caution. He pushed forward, taking cover behind a jagged outcrop. His pulse rate remained steady as he activated the stealth functions of his suit. The adaptive camouflage blended him into the landscape, making him nearly invisible. The drone's beacon flickered in his peripheral vision, its location marked clearly. But getting to it wouldn't be easy. Kane crouched low, moving swiftly, his boots barely making a sound on the alien soil. The air was thick, each breath tasting metallic, and the distant echo of alien roars filtered through his suit sensors. The Kretak were out there, and Kane had no illusions, they knew he was coming. Suddenly, a movement caught his eye, a flicker of something large darting through the shadows. Kane froze, activating his suit's thermal vision. Nothing. The Kretak were good at blending in with the environment. He couldn't rely on just sight. He needed to think, to anticipate. The ground beneath his feet shifted, and Kane's heart skipped a beat. A low, guttural sound reverberated through the canyon walls. He didn't need to see them. The Kretak were closing in. They had his scent now. A quick glance at his HUD showed multiple signatures converging on his position. There was no time to waste. He sprinted toward the beacon, his suit humming with energy as he leapt over jagged rocks, moving faster than any human should. The terrain was unforgiving, sharp edges tearing at his armor, but it held strong. His focus never wavered. His heart rate remained controlled, even as the first of the Kretak burst from behind the cliffs, their insectoid forms glowing in the dark. Kane didn't hesitate. He ducked behind another rock, quickly assessing the situation. There were too many to fight directly. He needed to outsmart them, to use the terrain against them. As the first Kretak came into view, Kane drew a small device from his belt. He tossed it into the air, and it detonated with a burst of bright light and sound. The Kretak reacted instantly, their glowing eyes flashing in anger, but Kane was already gone, blending back into the environment with the suit's camouflage. He moved quickly, using the confusion to his advantage. His eyes locked onto the drone, now just a few meters away. It was partially buried under rocks, the beacon still pulsing weakly. But the Kretak were closing in. He had seconds to extract the data and get out. Kane knelt beside the wreckage, his hands moving quickly over the controls. The drone systems were fried, but the data was still intact. His fingers danced over the interface, pulling up the files, transferring them to his suit's memory. As the data loaded, Kane's suit beeped softly, warning of increased Kretak presence. He had no more time. The first Kretak leaped from the shadows, its claws slashing the air. Kane stood and pivoted, pushing off the ground in a fluid motion, his suit enhancing his strength. He narrowly avoided the strike and drew his combat knife, slashing at the alien's exposed underbelly. It hissed in pain but didn't falter. More would follow. Kane gritted his teeth, backing away. The drone's data was in hand, but the real challenge was just beginning. The drone's data was secure, but the real battle had just begun. Kane could hear the Kretak moving in the shadows, their insectoid bodies skittering across the rocks like a whisper of death. He had only moments before they closed in. His suit's internal systems ran 100 calculations per second, scanning for the best route of escape. The canyon was too narrow for a full-on retreat. He needed a diversion. Kane scanned his surroundings. The alien flora, bioluminescent and toxic, provided a rare opportunity. With a sharp motion, he extracted a vial of chemical agents from his belt and hurled it into the thick vegetation nearby. It hissed as it collided with the ground, releasing a pungent odor. The Kretak, attracted to the scent, began to swarm. It was the break he needed. He activated the suit's camouflage again and darted to a new position, crouching behind a pile of loose rock. The Kretak were distracted, but they wouldn't stay that way for long. The diversion wouldn't hold them for more than a few minutes at best. He had to make his next move count. His sensors picked up movement, more Kretak, emerging from behind the cliffs. At least 5 of them, all armed with natural weapons that could rip through his suit like paper. He calculated the time he had before they reached him. His hand instinctively went to his combat knife, but that wouldn't be enough. He needed to think bigger, faster. Kane spotted a narrow passage just beyond the Kretak swarm. If he could funnel them into that choke point, he could collapse the entire section of the canyon, buying himself precious seconds to escape. It was risky. The explosion would be massive, and the structural integrity of the canyon would be compromised. But there was no other choice. He pressed a few buttons on his suit's control panel, activating the detonator. The Kretak were too focused on the chemical scent to notice him slip into position. He readied himself, preparing for the explosion that would tear the canyon apart. As the Kretak came closer, Kane threw another chemical charge farther down the canyon, creating a sudden burst of movement. The Kretak, confused, turned their attention in the wrong direction, unaware of the trap. With a quick motion, Kane triggered the explosion. The ground shook as massive rocks tumbled down, collapsing the canyon walls and blocking the Kretak's path. The resulting dust and debris obscured the area, providing him with the cover he needed to move swiftly. Kane didn't hesitate. He sprinted through the shifting terrain, his suit working overtime to keep him steady as the canyon began to crumble. The Kretak roared in frustration, but the explosion had given him the upper hand, and he was already out of their reach. He kept his head low, focusing on the extraction point ahead. There was no time to celebrate his victory, only to survive and complete the mission. His heart raced, but he kept his breathing steady. With the data secure and the Kretak temporarily halted, Kane knew that his window of escape was closing fast. He couldn't afford to make another misstep. Every second mattered now. The alien world around him continued to pulse with danger, but he pushed forward, knowing that his only path was ahead. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for humanity's future. Kane moved through the debris-filled canyon with a sense of urgency that sharpened his focus. His suit systems continued to alert him to the Kretak's presence, but the collapse had given him a few precious moments to put distance between himself and the swarm. His breath came in measured bursts, his heart steady despite the chaos surrounding him. He was alive, and that was all that mattered now. But he could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, heavier than any combat suit. The extraction point was ahead, just beyond the cliffside. He quickened his pace, his muscles aching from the sprint. The rain from the acidic storms pelted against his armor, sizzling where it made contact. His HUD showed several Kretak signatures still tracking him, but they were scattered, disoriented by the explosion. He wouldn't be free for long, but he was close enough to taste victory. Just as he rounded the corner, a sudden sound, a sharp, buzzing hiss, ripped through the air. Kane's instincts flared as the first Kretak leapt from the shadows, its claws swiping dangerously close to his face. He didn't have time to fight. His knife came out in a blur, cutting through the alien's arm with a swift motion, but the creature was quick. Another one joined the fray, and then another. They were closing in fast. He had to move. There was no time for hesitation, no time for strategy. With a brutal push, Kane forced his way through the Kretak, using the terrain to his advantage. His suit's enhanced strength gave him the leverage to send one of the creatures careening into the rocks. Another one lunged, but he dodged, his suit's agility allowing him to move with precision. A quick burst of energy from his jet pack sent him soaring forward, out of the immediate danger zone. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he neared the extraction point. The dropship was visible now, hovering in the distance. He wasn't out of the woods yet. Another Kretak leaped, slashing at his back, but Kane twisted and drove his combat knife into its chest. It screeched, its last breath a terrible sound before it crumpled to the ground. His suit absorbed the impact, but he knew he couldn't take much more. He pressed on, ignoring the burn in his legs and the blood trickling from the gash on his side. The ship was closer now, its engines roaring as it descended. Kane forced his body forward, pushing past the pain. He was so close. His mind, laser-focused, didn't waver. He had a mission to complete. Just as the dropship touched down, another Kretak lunged from the rocks. Kane didn't hesitate this time. He let the creature come, timing it perfectly before he ducked under its claws, using the last of his strength to drive his knife into its throat. It fell, its body twitching in the sand. Kane barely registered the relief as he sprinted the final few yards. The dropship's ramp lowered, and he dove inside, rolling onto the floor. The door sealed behind him just as the ship shot upward, the roar of the engines drowning out the last of the Kretak's shrieks. The pain from his injuries began to set in, but Kane didn't acknowledge it. He clenched the data disk in his hand, his focus still unbroken. The mission was a success. The data was intact. Humanity had a chance. As the dropship ascended into the sky, Kane leaned back against the wall, exhaustion creeping into his bones. His mind raced through the events, his mistakes, the creatures he'd fought, the lives he'd saved. He closed his eyes, the promise he'd made echoing in his mind. No hesitation. No failure. Not this time. He had done it. They had done it. And for once, the ghosts of his past didn't haunt him. He had survived. And now, so would humanity.